and welcome back to my channel. This is Marla. I'm so glad you're joining me today for part one of my three-part series, One Craft Essential All Card Makers Need. We are going to be creating 3 different cards using this craft essential. Today's card features some new products from Scrappy Tails Crafts. The Halloween release is here and it's amazing. I will link all the products in the description box below. Our craft essential that everyone needs is alpha dyes. This is something that's a well-loved product in my arsenal. You can see in this card that we're making today that I have used alphas to create a large sentiment on my card that says eek. Here's a look at some of the large dies that I have. I have several sets of dies, both small, medium, and large. I'm just showing you a few of them so you can see that there are so many out there. I'm not focusing on one brand because I do have many. This one's from Whimsy and it's more of a whimsical look. I have these tall, thin alphas, which is going to allow me to squeeze multiple letters together and get larger words on my cards. And then I have small ones here that will allow me to add a full sentiment. Let's jump into our card making. I have the new stencil from Scrappy Tails, which is the cute Halloween 5-layer stencil. I'm going to show you all 5 of those layers. What's fabulous about this stencil set is that it's 6 by 8, which means you are going to be able to use it to make slimline cards, 5 by 7 cards, which is the card size we're making today, and A2 size cards. I'll start with layer number 1 and some flirty fuchsia. We are going to ink up these ghosts. You can see I'm using a medium size blending brush for this. I'll be using all Catherine Pooler inks. This one is called Catching Rays, and I am just adding it to the candy corn. This is going to be my base layer. I will say that if you wanted the tip of your candy corn to be white, you could just leave that white. Our next layer is going to add some moons. I did have a little bit of black ink. I didn't clean my brush well enough, so I had some black ink on that brush and I needed to switch it out. This ink is called Chiffon, so once I add it to the other moons, you see how much brighter it actually is when it doesn't have black on the brush. We'll add a little bit of Tiki Torch, which is going to be the second layer of our candy corn, just adding a little bit of orange to that. And then we'll move on to stencil number 3. For stencil number 3, we are going to be adding some stars and some little polka dots or confetti pieces. I'm using the same color for this. I'm using drive-in ink and a very small blending brush. This small blending brush, again, allows me to reduce the amount of ink that I'm using since I only need a small little bit, and also allows me to get into those tiny places. These particular ones are from Amazon, and I will try to remember to link them in the description box below. We're going to color in our pumpkins with a bright orange. I don't remember the name of this ink, but I'll make sure to add it to the description list so you know which colors that I used on this. And we are going to add lime Rickey. Again, these are little stars that fill in some of the white space on this panel. And once I get this layer down, we are going to finish up with the final layer, which is going to be, oops, I spoke too soon. I'm adding a little bit of yellow to the candy corn, and that will finish up the pieces of candy corn, and then we'll move on to our final stencil. And for this layer, I am going to start adding more of the details to the ghosts. I'll be adding some bats and some spiders, so I chose to use VersaFine Black Onyx ink. Now, one of the points that I wanted to make is that when you do use VersaFine ink, you do need to just add your heat. You need to use your heat tool over the top of it before you move on with any die cutting that you might do, because this is a pigment ink and it is going to take a little bit longer to dry. One mistake that I did make with this is that I did forget to clean off my stencil right away, so I did get a little bit of staining, but I like the dark VersaFine ink because it does have a nice intensity to it. I used that lime Rickey for the stems on my pumpkins. I'm just adding the eyes with a smaller blending brush to my jack-o'-lanterns. And once I remove this, we'll have the final reveal, and you'll see just how fun this little 5-piece stencil set is. It is so incredibly versatile to stencil and create your own pattern paper, because of course you are able to create your own color combinations and your own color palette, which is something that I absolutely love. We're going to trim this down. I'm going to get 2 cards from this panel. In part 2, I will be showing another way to use some of the stenciling and the alpha dies, so stay tuned for that. That will be coming on Friday, along with an Instagram hop featuring the Scrappy Tails Crafts products. I had a little mishap here, so I'm going to run this through my die cutting machine. This is an older rectangle die. It's a double stitched rectangle die, and when I ran it through my die cutting machine, it didn't cut all the way through. I tried to realign the die, and when I realigned it, I didn't align it properly. I thought that I notched it in when I ran it back through, but apparently I didn't, and so I'm going to have a little bit of a jagged edge because of that. But this is going to be a shaker card, so I'm not really worried about it. I'm going to take the same large die that I used and add a smaller one to the inside, centering it to make sure that I have an equal border around all 4 sides, and then I'll run it through my die cutting machine so that I have a nice black frame for my shaker card. I am creating a seamless shaker card, so I am going to use some packaging for this. I just have excess packaging from one of the stamp sets that I purchased. I'm going to trim it down so that it will fit around the front of my card panel. This is my stenciled panel, so I'll just slip it inside, I'll trim it down, and then I am going to cut it in half because I only need one side, and I can save that second piece for another shaker card. Scrappy Tails did have some sequins or embellishment packs that were released with this Halloween release. Sorry about that. And the pack that I chose does have some of the colors that I used in my stenciling. So there is black, there is green, and there is orange, and it's going to coordinate nicely. To make sure that my packaging adheres tightly and the seams are closed, because we don't want any of our pieces to spill out. So I really want a tight seal. That's what I was trying to say. Sorry about that. I am using my Elizabeth Craft Designs double-sided tape. I'm mitering my corners. Now, the final corner that I miter, I don't miter it closely enough, and so I do end up with a little bit of bulk in one of the corners, but because I am using the frame, it's not going to be too noticeable when I finish with this. So I'm just going to remove the release paper, and I'm just pulling that packaging tightly, making sure that the ends are closed nicely. I'm going to have to add a couple pieces of tape to the corners just to make sure that the overlapping plastic is closed over top. So I'll remove that release paper, and then once I get this side closed, I am going to start adding my cute little essentials in the inside. I only used a quarter pack of the embellishments. This one is called Monster Mash, because I wanted to make sure that the stenciling showed through. I only wanted a little bit of shake. You can certainly add more and fill this up. I had plenty of room if I wanted to add half of the bag or even the whole bag, but I just wanted a little bit of the shaking element inside. Once I get everything inside, I am going to miter those two corners and I'll remove the release paper, and then you'll see where I struggle with the left corner trying to get it aligned evenly, and that's only because I had a little bit excess of the plastic and I should have mitered it a little bit more closely. Because this is plastic, I couldn't use my heat tool to try to remove some of the stickiness from my tape and, heat that up so that I could open the packaging back up. It would have melted my plastic, so I tried to pull it apart, but it just didn't quite work, and I just have that little bit of a bulge in the corner. Once I get this completed, I am going to add the frame around the outside edge. So we are going to add that adhesive to all four corners of our frame, and then we are going to start aligning it to complete the front of this panel. I started with the idea of an A2 size card, and as this developed, I began to merge into a 5x7. I don't make a whole lot of 5x7 cards, but I thought that there needed to be a little something more to the card panel. It just was looking a little bit plain to me. So when I went with the 5x7 card, I was able to add a few more elements from one of the die sets that was part of the Scrappy Tail release. And I think that it just added a little bit more interest, and it also gave me a little bit more room to add one of those large alphas. As I mentioned, this is part one of a three-part series. In each part of the series, I am going to focus on a different technique using alphas. One of the things that I like about using the alpha dies is that I can create my own sentiments. I can create my own words. When you're using larger dies, of course, you're going to get smaller words. But the thing that's nice about it is when you look at some of these larger dies that you're purchasing that have either one word on it or maybe one or two different words on it, and it's a large sentiment that takes up the front of your card, that's the only sentiment that you get. For the same price or maybe just a little bit more, you are able to use your sentiment die or your alpha dies to create multiple words. In the case of this large die that I'm using today, I'm using the word eek. You could use the word boo. You could use the word joy for Christmas. You could add B-Day for birthday and use a sentiment stamp for the word happy. Back to the card, I do have the Purr-Fect Halloween die set. This die set comes with multiple pieces. I'm using the ghost and that drive-in ink. I will run it through my die cutting machine. There are also bats, there are kitty cats, there are pumpkins, so many different pieces that you can use for your Halloween card making. So here is that large alpha. I'm using the lime Rickey. I like to stack up my letters so you can see I have an extra E. I also have an exclamation point. That was one nice thing about this alpha set, is it did come with some punctuation marks. I want to add some embossing powder to this. I wanted this to have a nice kind of like a plastic feel to it, and so what I'm doing is I'm adding some Versamark ink to these letters, and then I'm using this ultra thick embossing powder. it is going to give me a super thick coating of embossing, and when you melt it, it looks like, I guess you could even say patent leather. So if you maybe used one of the Tim Holtz leather embossing folders and you used this ultra thick embossing powder, you would get that nice leather pattern, and you'd have kind of like a vinyl or a pleather look to your letters. Using the ultra thick embossing powder just adds that extra shine. It adds a little bit more dimension to the top of those alphas. So here's that 5x7 panel that I was talking about. I cut out a lot of the bats from the die set, and I will have, again, all the products linked in the description box below. But I have added these bats all around the outer edge. Because I have my shaker card that's going to go in the middle, I am just spacing them as best I can with my eyes around the outer edge, and then I will place a few to fill in some of the blank space that happens. So you can see right there, there's a little bit of blank space on that right side and the bottom of the card that I need to fill in just to make sure that this background is filled. But I don't need to add it all over the card because a good portion of that panel is going to be covered with the shaker bits. And you can see how cute this card is coming together now. I love the addition of those little bats. And once I get my bats adhered, I do like to add a little bit of detail. So for this card, I'm going to use my white gel pen to add some accents to each of my bats. When I add my accents, I add dots and lines. So I'll adhere this little panel using some art glitter glue. That's my glue of choice. I do prefer wet glue over tape runners myself. And now we're going to kind of place our letters to see where we want each of our pieces. You can see that little ghost up top. What I did is I used that ultra thick embossing powder again over the top of the ghost to make sure that it had that same texture as my sentiment does. And I did the same with the spider. I colored it up using some VersaFine Black Onyx ink, and then I just dipped it in my embossing powder, heated it up, and again, we are going to have that same cohesive feel all the way throughout the card. Get this K down. When I glued down my ghost, I made sure that the eyes and the mouth were backed by the frame, so I angled it to make sure that it was backed by the frame so that the blacks of the eyes of that ghost would show through. I'm actually going to use my gel pen on the eyes towards the end, and I am going to just add those or add that little bit of white to the eyes to give it a little bit more definition. I'm going to glue my little spider to the center of this large K just to add a little bit more detail. And then again, here is that white gel pen. I'll add it to each and every bat that's on the card. As I mentioned, I'm not focusing on the brands that I used for my card today for the alpha dies, but I will link a set from scrapbook.com that is very similar in the description box if you're interested in a large set of alphas. They're super reasonably priced. Here I'm adding some green eyes using a couple of those gems to give that spider just a little bit more oomph. And there's where I'm adding the whites to the eyes of my ghost, and that will complete the card for today. I'll add it to a 5x7 card base, We are finished. I hope you enjoyed this video today. Here is a close-up. Until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day. Looking forward to seeing you for part 2. Thanks for watching.